We're all living our lives for the first time.
Welcome to Coachfellas video series 5 Talks with Coaches. Hi, my name is Edwin. I'm an ontological coach and founder of Coachfellas. Coachfellas is an online marketplace for professional and life coaches, and our mission is to make coaching accessible for everyone. This video marks the launch of 5 Talks with Coaches series, and we are excited to have our first guest, Lin Chin, with us today. Lin is a coach specializing in mindset, career fulfillment, and self-leadership. Lin is dedicated to helping aspiring entrepreneurs and professionals define and pursue careers that align with their personal growth and vision. Her approach is rooted in psychology, focusing on the values, experiences, and relationships that drive success and leadership. Lin helps clients develop self-awareness, identify strengths and blind spots, and build confidence to unlock their full potential. Join me in welcoming Lin. Morning.
Hi, thank you. I realized our colors match a little bit actually.
Black. So, Lin, why do you coach?
Yeah, wow, jumping right into it. I think if I kind of break it down into a few pieces, on the more personal, I guess almost selfish front, I actually really just wanted to be a better human being. Because what I realized after, 3.5 decades was in school and then at work, I was growing a lot in terms of the skills that I picked up at work, the perspective of different industries or working with different people. But there were certain very fundamental human things that I felt I really wanted to improve on. I felt like I couldn't sit in front of somebody and, express empathy or translate that into something that would help them grow. And I think related to that, I also found increasingly over the course of my career that I started actually very much on the systems level and a policy level. But ultimately, even if you're looking at change at scale, I found that a lot of the ultimate impact of factor came down to people, right? It came down to like individuals. And so I think over the course of my career, I was increasingly moving towards like, what is that first unit of change? And that's kind of what led me to coaching. And then at the same time, what I also realized in the workplace was that for me personally, and then for people that I saw around me, whether it was friends or family or peers, right? So for me personally, the greatest growth that I achieved came when I worked with people, bosses, teams that had a few, that had a few principles or like practice and things that gave me that space to develop, right? And I think one of them is that the belief that your potential isn't limited by your previous experience. And related to that, kind of giving you that trust to own a certain outcome, to figure out your way of doing things, rather than kind of like overmanage you and, say like restrict you to what they might have observed or what you've done before. And I think some of the things that also really inspired me about the people that I was very fortunate to work with was that I think they highlighted strengths as much as we looked at areas of improvement. And I had really good bosses and managers who were very deliberate about looking at, okay, where do I naturally lean towards, right? Like what is my natural tendencies? Where do I tend to criticize myself? And then how do you kind of balance that with like, okay, look at all the things that you can do, or how do you develop skills that would balance out a certain perspective or set of skills you have? And I saw that this development-based approach was much more helpful and much more healthy in the workplace compared to what I saw other people go through. And so I wanted to make that kind of the core of the work that I do increasingly, because I've seen so many people who are capable of so much more than what they think they're able to do. And a lot of it is really just giving them that space and that scaffolding and structure to kind of grow into it. So, I guess the idealistic part is I thought I could make a difference on like the fundamental unit level of like broader change by working with people and giving them that space to kind of grow into themselves and understand themselves better. Yeah. Very long answer.
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, like, really, the idea of being a better human being, I think that's very powerful as well. And really appreciate the work you do, working with people, looking at their strengths, and just letting them be more intentional, I guess, in what they focus on. Like, focusing on the strengths, the capabilities, not just on the weaknesses. And yeah, so I realized your company, Deliberate Humans, very deliberate, very intentional. Can you share more about what inspired the name?
Yeah, it's a long name. I feel like from a marketing perspective, it's not necessarily the best, but I think it accurately encapsulates what I try to do, right? So when I was thinking of a name, like at the end of the day, you don't want to spend too much time overthinking this when you're starting a company or a business. But I also wanted it to be something that I knew I could stand behind consistently. And I think the starting point for a lot of growth for me, and I think for a lot of people, is self-awareness. And I see that not just in the workplace, but when I was studying and training in psychology, or when I was kind of, I think, even doing pure helpline volunteer work, right? I think that understanding of yourself, that awareness of how you are behaving in certain situations, why you react in a certain way, like being very aware of your defaults and also being very aware of where you want to go. I think is generally a really big part of, like, that is the first step to making any change or moving in a direction that you actually want to go, as opposed to just falling into a direction, right? And I find that a lot of times, maybe because, this is kind of how we grow up. We grow up with in a very structured way for a lot of us, with a very clear process. And I think it's very easy to just kind of like fall into certain paths or fall into certain ways of thinking or being or feeling. And I, like, generally, the better we know ourselves and the more intentional our decisions, the more able we are to, I guess, accept those decisions and learn from them, right? And kind of make the most of them. So, for example, right, I think I meet a lot of people who really want to do something, but they're afraid to do it because so let's say you want to change a job, but you're not willing to, um, accept a lower pay, right? Even if that gets you on a higher trajectory. Or you want to take up a new hobby, but then you don't actually want to let go of all the other things that you're doing, right? And I find that every decision that you make has a trade-off. And it is easier for you to accept that trade-off, even if it doesn't turn out the way you want it, if you know why you made that decision. Because life isn't going to be a series of perfect actions and decisions and turning points, right? So I think it's about coming to terms with that, making sure that you know why you have done something at each stage, and through that process of knowing why, also being very aware of who you are and what's important to you.
Yeah, I think, like you said, every decision has a trade-off, and knowing why really gives you that sense of like purpose in pursuing something. And sometimes I feel a lot of people struggle with also like, what do they really want? And I think the fact that you come from the why, I think is even more powerful, because it goes even deeper and further to why do you want something, or why do you want this thing that you're looking going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned careers, and I know in our discussions we talk about a career as like a ladder versus a career gym. So maybe could you share more about the difference, what people should look out for?
Actually, in my head, I never really know whether it's a career jungle or like a jungle gym, which is more like a playground. But I think the element about jungle gym I like is that, work can be fun. It doesn't have to be like just a job. A lot of times it is, and that's fine. But there can be parts of it that also bring some kind of growth and fulfillment. So I think if I think about a career ladder, I think about what my parents grew up with in terms of their idea of a career, right? You go somewhere and then you stay 10 years, 20 years, and it's very clear what your progression is. And so I think there are three aspects of that metaphor of a career ladder, which is, one is that it is static, like the ladder is leaning against the wall, right? Like it's there. And I think the second part is, the rungs are fixed. So you get from one stage, you go to another. It's like that process is very clearly mapped out. And the third one is that it's linear. Like I've never seen a ladder that kind of goes around, right? And I think in most like I guess in most traditional career paths and in a lot of larger organizations, they do kind of still map that out because it gives people a certain level of certainty. But even in those organizations, I find that the path to progression is not as linear as it used to be, 30, 40 years ago, right? And so when we talk about the analogy of a jungle or a jungle gym, it's really kind of capturing how dynamic and organic the workplace and the world is today, right? I think like everybody is aware of how like even over the last 10 years, the level of uncertainty has been growing, right? We really don't know what's going to happen 2 years from now, 5 years from now. And so any company and any context that an organization is operating in is going to be less clear-cut. The career paths that are built are going to be less static and consistent. And so when we talk about a career jungle gym, it's really, okay, how do you navigate the situation that is constantly changing? The organization can try to provide some level of clarity and certainty, but they are also trying to evolve with the world. And so I guess the way I think about jungle gym is, okay, when you look at career design or planning, or even like I generally think about career attitudes, like what is your mentality or expectation of a career? That linearity, I think, is gone in for most people, right? Not that it isn't there anymore, it's just that it doesn't work for a lot of people. And so what's happening is then we start looking at, okay, how do we diversify the set of skills that we have, the perspective that we have, and basically build our own unique portfolio of skills, our own sense of what kinds of contexts and cultures and organizational structures we work well in, right? And I think one very important part to consider is that in a jungle or in a jungle gym, it's not just about moving forward and upward, right? Like the direction goes in all sorts of in all sorts of directions, right? So sometimes, for example, you have to move backwards or you move sideways in order to get through the jungle. Otherwise, you're just going to be stuck. And so it becomes a more, I think, like three-dimensional kind of space that we are operating in. And because of that, I think what's really liberating, but also can be very scary for people, is that when you look at your career in the next, 10, 20 years, you can't really chart out something and go, okay, this is something I'm just going to follow. Like I'm going to follow this, because like your plan, what's it called? Like your plan only lasts until you get punched in the face or something like that. Right. Yeah, so it's really about, okay, how do I navigate this jungle, right? And sometimes it's like you got to swing on a vine to go to another tree. Sometimes it's like, okay, you got to run on the ground, whatever it is, but you find a way to get through. You just need a different toolkit. Yeah.
So when you talk about jungle gym, right? I mean, the analogy definitely works, because nowadays we keep talking about like what VUCA world, like volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And you mentioned diversifying your skill set. So I'm just thinking, like, is it only focused on skill set, or do you also look at, okay, are we looking at crossing industries? Because like you say, your ladder's linear, right? But it's on one place only. Are we looking at also crossing industries? And how does that play out for clients? Like if they say, oh, I want to start out in something totally new right now. Like you mentioned just now about choice, right? So how does it all play together in their minds, and how do you help them dissect that?
Yeah. Okay. So maybe I'll like talk first about what that is like, and then how I sometimes work with clients or what I see with them. I guess when I say skills, I kind of mean it in quite a broad way. There are your technical skills, so an area of functional expertise, for instance. But I think skills also come in terms of course, we know soft skills, how you get along with people, how you interact with them. But I also think, for me, I think of skill set or a toolkit as also the perspectives that you can bring. So for instance, what kind of backgrounds of the people that you worked with before, or that you are able to kind of flex to learn to work with. I think about it in terms of, have you had exposure to different markets, different industries as well? Because that like that builds the skill of flexibility and agility, right? Like if you know you're able to adapt to certain contexts, then you have that flexibility that actually isn't like, it's not something that you can go into a course or an MBA and kind of get it, right? It's something that you really have to
You
kind of
build.
experience yourself and realize through the experience what you're capable of and how much you want to stretch yourself. So I guess when you talk about changing industries or moving even across different functions, for me, I don't know, and I think some people out there in the recruiting space or in like within organizations think this way, but I think it's not everybody does. The way I approach it is that it's not so much what your title was previously on your CV or even specifically what your responsibilities were. It's about what enabled you to execute on something or to strategize on something or whatever it is, right? Like what is behind that title, what is behind the project, what's behind that task or responsibility that is on your CV or that you put down and say that I've done this before, right? And I think a very important meta skill is learning how to teach yourself. Learning how to teach yourself and learning who you are, right? How do you learn best? How do you adapt? What are things that you kind of fall into? And so when people look at moving into a different industries, I guess this moves towards how I work with clients or what I see with clients, but also peers, just friends who are kind of in this space. I think it is a combination of understanding what. So one gap I think is understanding what is out there. If you want to move to an industry, why do you actually want? Is it a push or it's a pull? If it's a pull, then I think it's also if it's a pull or actually even if it's a push, then it's okay. What are the assumptions behind it? Like, have you done I call it de-risking or due diligence, because a lot of people tend to see things like they think either I'm going to completely jump ship and I'm going to like drop, or I'm going to jump ship and I'm going to fly, or like I don't jump at all, right? But there are a lot of assumptions behind that. Like, where do you get your perception of a particular industry? Like, what is it that you need to know in order to make a decision with 70% confidence as opposed to like 30%? It's never going to be 100. So then I work with them kind of on like de-risking it by identifying the assumptions that they have and matching that with their comfort level as they transition. And then I think probably the third part, like there's of course like looking for the job and interviewing and all of that, but like the third part that I work with them on is like when they have decided to make that switch, what does that actually look like, right? So I have some clients who, for them it's like, okay, let me try out this other thing that I want to do one day on a weekend for like 6 months. For some people it is, okay, can I actually test that out with similar responsibilities in my current role in my organization? And then for some other people, it's just like, okay, let me go and test all these assumptions and realize that, oh, actually, I'm kind of already on track. Just I have to reframe the way I'm seeing my current path. But if they do have to kind of make that transition and they decide, okay, yeah, this is for me, then it's about working with them to figure out, okay, at each stage, what are the new situations that are coming up that you have to deal with? What are the ways that you have actually dealt with it before, but maybe you don't recognize it because it's in a completely different environment? And then bringing that out, or maybe sometimes they do ask my perspective, which is just like one data point, please go and get more data points. And then they have to learn to experiment and test and figure out what makes sense for them. So that's I guess how I approach it and how I would kind of like break it down. It's very practical and experiential.
Nice. I like it when you say like it's really going beyond the title, right? Because like behind the projects that you do, like you identify the key skills like adaptability, the flexibility, the agility, and I think those are key skills that are not really emphasized right now so much. And those are the ones that actually get you to move forward, right? Because experience only helps you to do the past better, but adaptability and flexibility helps you to move forward. So I really like it. And the idea that you have a de-risking kind of like example for your client, like I do one thing on the weekend for 6 months. It kind of gives them a sense of like what it might look like. And yeah, before they actually jump into like the ocean deep, right? So
Yeah, and I think like a common thing that I see is that people want certainty, right? So
okay.
like the toughest clients for me, and sometimes I tell them I'm not the right person for you, is when they come to me and they're like, okay, I want to change job. Tell me what is going to work for me for the next 5 years. And I'm like, I can't. And I think I think it is worth thinking about whether the need for certainty is serving you.
Mm,
Because what I find is some people, they know they don't want what they currently have, right? They
right.
don't actually know what they want,
Mm,
but that process of discovery is not easy. Like that is the work.
right.
Uh, and I think it's sometimes very easy to go like, oh, okay, this option A, B, C sounds like it works well for me. I'm going to pick one and just run with it for the next 5 years
Right.
without actually knowing, right?
Wow. Okay.
So I like if that is what they want, like that's totally fine. I know a lot of people need that certainty for a lot of different reasons, but I'm not the one who's able to provide it for them.
Mm,
And I
mm,
would encourage them also to like just generally experiment a bit more. Don't be in a hurry to like have closure that might not actually be what you need.
mm,
And then you're just gonna like spend 5 years in something that might be 40% of what you actually want because you wanted that certainty, right? Like
yeah.
take 2 years or take like 6 months to like test all these different things, and then you kind of set your direction.
I think it's interesting you said like they know what they don't want, which is like
Mhm.
get me far away from that, but they don't really know where they're going. Um,
Yeah, and I think like it's very understandable because for a lot of people, I mean for everyone, right? You've only experienced what you've experienced.
mm,
So I think for a lot of people, it's you can't boil the ocean. So if you're in
mm,
somewhere that you are not unhappy, there's no reason for you to move, or you don't feel like an itch towards a particular direction. It's
right.
just okay lah, stay there lah.
Mm,
And so it becomes when something is not uh like something is not what they expected, or they realize something is missing, or like by the way, I think about the statistics is 70% of people leave their jobs because of their direct manager or one level above that.
mm.
So usually when that happens, it's just okay, I'm really fed up, I want to quit and sell coffee. Which is a very is I hear all the time. um and uh and I think then when you face a push, right, the question is, what are you then pulled towards?
Mm,
And that is something that we often don't get a chance to figure out early on in our careers or in school. You kind of only figure out by doing, and everybody's only doing their career for the first time because you
mm,
don't get a redo.
true.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of moving people away from this idea that you have to have like a perfect career, and
Mm.
the career is an avenue for you to grow and continue to contribute and in different ways that you're able to.
I think for them, maybe it's like a sunk cost, right? I've already spent so much time doing this career. If I suddenly jump ship, then I'm not even certain of where I'm going. Then what if I lose my success of all my achievements come to waste, right?
Mm.
Mm,
Yeah, and then there are so many things to unpack below that,
mm,
right? Because it's like if you are experiencing some cost in other areas of life. So for example, okay, this is not a great example because it also happens, but let's say like investment, right? You put like
mm,
$5,000 into a stock and then the stock keeps tanking. And then, you at some point you want to have a stop loss and like pull it out
yeah.
so that you can reinvest it. But we would do that for something that we can quantify, and then we feel like we hold ourselves back.
Mm,
Because, and a lot of that, because I've been in that position before as well, and I think a lot of it has to do with um confidence. A lot of it has to do with having the chance to like test your value in the market.
mhm,
And then another part that I often see is like it's still the attachment to the idea that your career is going to be linear, right?
mm,
In reality, like yes, maybe you lose this linearity, but if you take a step back, first of all, you don't know that you might find something that uses all the skills and experience that you have that are
Mm.
already you now. It's not about the title or the role. It's that you have that skills or experiences. How do you use them? You can use them in a different way, right? So one is you don't know that you might actually find that until you try.
Mhm.
And second part is even if you ever take a step back in terms of, let's say, the territory that you manage is smaller, or like your pay for the next year or whatever is less, what does that look like in 5 years, right? Like you have to, I always think you kind of have to stay in the present but build for the future.
Mhm.
Um, and striking that balance is really difficult if like you're in a headspace where you're very much focused on what you're going to lose versus what you might be able to gain.
And so a lot of the your conversations with your clients also actually look out to like helping them to be successful, and you mentioned helping your clients achieve success. So really, what is success in terms of like your definition, or when you coach your clients, what they see as success?
Yeah, thanks for throwing the last line in because I don't have a definition of success for them. I think it's really person dependent, and I think part of my role is to help them start figuring that out.
Mm.
Um, and for me, and I'm pretty transparent about this, so it's not for everyone, and I guess the clients who come to me tend to gravitate towards my approach. But I think success has to be quite holistic. It's not just like, oh, I hit certain targets in this part of life and then like
Mhm.
everything else in life kind of drops away, right? So one of the first exercises I do with any client is to go like, okay, what are the different domains in your life, right? Usually you have family, you have work, you have, parents, you have career, which is different from work for some people, um, health, like investment, whatever, right? But they define that, and then I ask them to look at what they want it to be like if they consider everything holistically, right? So
Mm.
like you can break down your level of satisfaction across each domain, but
Mm.
if you look at your life overall, most people don't want their career to be a 9 and then their family to be a 2, right?
Mm.
Or they don't want like their family to be a 10 and then their work suffers and becomes like a 3 or 4.
Yes.
So I think it's about getting people to kind of think in a broader sense. That at least that's my approach. And also getting them to think then for this season of their lives, because your like
Mm.
success at like 50 is going to look very different from success at 20. So for this particular season of your life, what matters most to you, right? Like what
Mm.
is what has maybe like a time factor or a certain level of urgency that you want to consider. Yeah, so I think for some people it's literally like, oh, actually I think I've hit everything I want in my career. It's more like now I want to focus on, having a kid. Or for some people it's, I feel like I never had the chance to travel when I was younger, and now
Mm.
I want the flexibility to let me do that. Or I want to have independence and have my own home, for instance.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
so like it's really kind of working with them to figure out what will bring them fulfillment, meaning. Sometimes it's minimizing regret.
Mm.
Yeah, but what I find is that, and I think I can say this is backed up by psychology and research as well, is that people are, even the most extreme introverts, we are naturally geared towards a level of connection, a level of like
Mm.
contribution, and also feeling that we are competent at what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
And to me, like I always say, I love work because when I took a break from work to go back to university, I felt quite unhappy. I
Right.
really miss working. Yeah. So I feel like work actually can be very powerful, very meaningful. It
Mhm.
is like an avenue for a lot of growth, for a lot of connection. It can be, right? Not
Mm.
always.
Yeah.
It shouldn't necessarily have that pressure to be. But I feel like it could be, and to get people like a little bit closer to where they start seeing work that way and start um, designing their life, designing their day such that work is that way versus like a source of constant pressure or
Mm.
just job
Mm. Mm.
income. Like that is so much time of our lives that could be a little bit more satisfying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I also see and note that actually more people are trying to find work that's more meaningful and impactful, but also they want to balance that personal values with their families, with their health, etc. So, and I also like it that you talk about the seasons of your life, because
Mm.
really at different seasons there is different priority. Maybe they don't see it or they don't admit it yet, but there typically is something that you want more at that period in time. Yeah.
Mm.
So, sorry, based on like what you spoke about, well, what your clients share, right? What do you see is like the biggest challenge for them when they're trying to pursue this then success?
I think the challenge is knowing what you're pursuing.
Mm,
I think, okay, there are like a few challenges, and I think it also depends on the person and the stage that they're at. Normally, when we think about success, I think we tend to focus very much on professional success, like
mm,
things that are quantifiable. I'm sure some people also think of success in terms of like the kind of family or the kind of like image or
mm,
the kind of life that they feel uh is a successful one that you can kind of
mm,
see, that you can kind of like emulate. um I think the biggest challenge is figuring out what your own version of success is, because a lot of times we don't realize how what we grew up with defines us.
mm.
And I don't mean defines us by like we want to replicate what we saw when we were young. Sometimes it's we want to run away from it,
Yeah.
right? But it's still a reaction to something that
Mm,
happened. So if you were to kind of like get rid of all of that and you just think about what makes you happy, what works for you, um, that is the hardest part of it, I think.
mm,
The second the second part that's also really difficult is, okay, if you figure that out and it's not what you have grown up believing is
right.
success, how do you make that shift? And not just that mental shift to go like, okay, I kind of accept this, but how do you actually translate that into your actions and have that sense of confidence and settledness
Mm,
and peace in your actions, right? So for instance, if you've grown up thinking that success is really like you go to the best schools, you know,
mm,
work in the best organizations, you have all these brand names, like you do really well, you get very respected, you're the boss of a team, and then you realize at some point you're like, okay, all that is great. I've done all of that. But maybe in this season of my life, actually, what I want to do is I want to be able to put my kids to bed. Or like
mm,
I want to be able to bring my kids to school in the morning without having to like rush meetings or whatever.
mm,
Or I want a rewarding relationship with my partner without,
mm,
without having to worry that like I have to get called in to see like, I don't know, the global CEO. Um,
mm,
and can't say no, right? Like if you realize that that is actually what you want, like right now for the foreseeable future, it can be really difficult to go like, let me let go of everything that I have been pursuing for the last 20 years
yeah.
and start shifting towards that. Like that I would say those two things are like the
Yeah.
things. And actually the second one is a big reason why some people don't want to do the first one.
Mm, mm. Because it does take a lot of courage to go against all the contexts that you grow up with, that you live in society right now, and say, okay, I'm going to choose a different kind of success, like it's putting the kids to bed or spending time with my family. So I think I see courage as like one thing that's very, very like people actually need it to actually take
Mm.
that first step towards moving towards their success that they want. Just curious, so like what else in your coaching process do you see or you help them to have a better relationship with pursuing success?
Um, yeah, so I think finding out so I think in the to start with the two buckets that I mentioned, right? Finding out what your own version of success is, I
Mm,
think can also be scary because it is a process.
mm,
And it doesn't give you back to that point about certainty. It's not something where like you sit down for half a day or you go for like an 8-day retreat and you suddenly have like a new version of what you're aiming
mm,
towards, right? Because as you kind of move towards a different perspective, or you move towards, I guess, almost a different part of your identity, that is a process where you're also figuring out what that identity looks like or what that
mm,
life looks like. And to figure that out, you need to actually try things and get a sense of like, does this make sense for me? Um, so I think in addition to kind of like helping clients unpack that and then translate that into practice, it's also really giving them a space to go like, okay, I don't feel safe experimenting in maybe some other parts of their lives because they haven't done it before. So how do they start with coaching, or how do we design a space for them in different parts of their lives where they go, okay, I can just start taking the first step and then I take the second step. And through that process, usually most people realize like, oh, okay, it's not as bad as I thought it would be, you know. And then they themselves get the confidence to continue trying this in a different way. And I think that's how like real mindset and behavioral change happens. I don't even want to say behavioral because it's so superficial. It's like how identity change happens,
Yeah.
because you do things and you realize, oh, you're actually impacting the environment a certain way. Like you are getting feedback to yourself in a certain way as well. So when your internal dialogue aligns with like external action, then I think that can be really powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Oh, I really like it when you talk about identity actually, because like just now you mentioned that it's going beyond the title about in your career as well, right? And a lot of people actually see their identity as their title. Like I'm
Mm,
CFO of so and so, I'm whatever director of blah blah blah. So then I think letting go of that to pursue the uncertain success that they define for themselves, it can be very, very scary. And yeah, I think I like how you say, how do you design that new pathway or new life one step at a time? Yeah. And
mm.
I think some people just think like, oh, I need to get there like immediately. It's like gonna be a huge chasm to jump over. But when you say like it's one step at a time, then yeah, it kind of like puts things in perspective for them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy, right? Because it's like we're all living our lives for the first time. And I think it's crazy that we kind of expect ourselves sometimes to have like the perfect plan
Right.
for 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, when like we don't even know, like there's so much in the world that we can't influence. Um, like how, like where does this idea of like success or perfection come from? Because that is constantly changing, right? Like
Yes.
even if you know yourself from a very young age and you know like, okay, like conventional paths aren't for me, like maybe I don't even want a family, you know, maybe I don't want to like work in a large organization, then that is still going to change as well, right? And I think letting go of what we have thought is ourselves for a long time and then figuring out like who are we aside from all of these titles or all of these labels, um, is like, to me that is the work lah. Like that is the self work that is difficult but also very honest in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Right. I really like it when you talk about, oh, we're all living for the first time. Just like how you mentioned, we're all taking careers for the first time.
Yeah.
Because it is like a experiment, right, for everybody, because we never know how it will turn out.
Mm,
And so moving into like your like whole experimental, your mind and everything, and you mentioned you studied psychology.
yeah.
So how does psychology play into your coaching methodology or approach, and how does it enhance or give the clients a different experience?
Yeah, so I studied psychology fairly recently. I was actually in a very different space, venture capital. And then I think with COVID, there were quite a lot of changes, as we all know, and I basically couldn't complete the project that I wanted to complete, right? Which was like market expansion. And so I thought, okay, I think this is a great time to go back and really explore something that I always wanted to. Um, which was going back to, like, I didn't expect to go back to university in my late 30s, which was itself an adventure. But I think I would break up the answer to your question in two ways. One is like how studying psychology has affected me, or like framed everything that I've done and what that means as a coach. And then the other part is like how do I actually use specific things to work with clients. And so the first part is, I think what studying psychology really did for me was, first of all, kind of understanding in a much deeper, inherent way what diversity means, how different people are, and how complex it is for any individual to become the person that they are, right? Like when we look at other people in like around us or like in society, we're just like, oh, this person behaves this way, or this person thinks this way, or this person acts this way. But underneath that, like all that is formed based on a whole mix of other factors, right? You're talking about like developmental side, which I love, which is like across your entire lifespan, what are the factors that kind of influence the way you become or present yourself. There's of course biological factors. There's like how you think, how different people think is shaped in a lot of different ways. What are the factors that kind of influence that, whether you're talking about within the family or your individual disposition or like broader society or culture. And so I think meeting a lot of different people and then really like understanding how all of these things kind of interact to form humans just kind of made me generally less ready to categorize people in a certain way. And so I think it has become a lot easier for me to accept and understand people as they are. I think the other side, the other way in which psychology has helped me a bit, and this is also like some of the volunteer work that I did, is it I think you have to ask my clients about that, but I think I'm generally quite good at getting beyond what seems to be the surface topic or issue quite quickly. Whether or not we actually go into that is really up to the client. Like it's really not about like, let's talk about your childhood or your family. It's not about that. It's more like, okay, when you tell me this is the problem, what might be underneath it, right? Let's start to explore those. And then in terms of how I work with clients, I think what that means is I tend to work with clients in I guess a slightly deeper way. I kind of like to go under the ice, like what is it, like what's below the water in the iceberg. And also the tools that I use and the methods that I use are quite informed by psychology. So for instance, redirecting attention to certain aspects of themselves or a particular situation so that you don't fixate on a particular narrative, for instance, right? Like how do you develop meaning, or how do you split perception and fact or observation? And then I think when it comes to things like experimentation, habit formation, shifting mindset, I'm very interested not just in what goes on inside your head, but how does that actually translate to how you interact with other people and your environment. And so how do we design certain habits, certain environments? How do we get you out of your comfort zone? When we talk about confidence, it's not just say great things about yourself, which can actually be helpful, but how do you anchor that confidence in things that you do or how you interact with people? And we do that in a very kind of like practical, hands-on way.
First, want to say, you from VC to psychology, definitely very career jungle gym in practice. So very good. Psychology is very interesting. So it really helps you to understand, right, the human behavior a lot deeper, and then you don't want to you really have more empathy for people around you. I was just curious, like when you talk about with your clients, like saying going deeper into the topics and surface, right?
Yeah.
Are there like themes that you see, like, oh, because certain things happen in your past and therefore certain things you will do now, or you have certain behavior? Is there some correlation there, or not at all?
I think there could be correlation, but I don't necessarily do that with clients because I mean, I think unless they want to go there, right? Unless they find it helpful. Because for me, one of the reasons why I thought I would go into coaching rather than clinical is like I didn't necessarily want to dig up a lot of stuff that they might not be ready to deal with. But I bring it out when it's helpful to them, and like the decision is always theirs, right? So I think when we talk about going deeper, what it could look like is, let's say somebody comes to you and they're like, Okay, I'm trying to not use an example that we've already spoken about. Yeah. So let's say they are coming to you and they're like, okay, I have this problem with this person at work, for instance, right? Um, and every time they say this, I feel a certain way. Then I will work with them to go like, okay, actually, what is under that, right? What are you telling yourself when they use certain words? Or another example could be, I feel like I want to, you know, I'm not really excited about my job, or I actually don't want to focus so much on work now, but I I don't really know what I want in life. Like I'm not able to shift towards spending more time with family or spending time on things that bring me joy.
Mhm.
Um, even though I don't want to focus on work right now. Then
Right.
I'm like, okay, so what are you driving towards at work, right? And then sometimes through the
Mhm.
conversation, we realize like, okay, actually, like your identity is very closely tied with achievement. So if you're
Right.
not doing well at work, then that affects how you see yourself,
Right.
right? Okay, then we talk about where does that come from, right? Sometimes we go into it a bit more if they want to go into it, but sometimes it's really more about like, okay, so we just sit at that level where your identity is closely tied to achievement. How do we start balancing that out with other parts of
Mm.
your life, right? So
Right.
we don't always have to dig into it, but I'm not I'm not simply addressing the question of like, hey, I want to spend more time with
Right.
family, or I'm very unhappy at work, right? How do we make you happier?
You've recently undergone a new rebrand. You've also launched new coaching programs and services. Can you tell me more about what you offer?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for noticing. I think the rebrand is a bit of a fun thing for me. um, like realistically, because I also coach business owners, right? And
Mm.
it's just like having a very nice website or having a very nice logo or brand actually doesn't necessarily drive business. But I think what I found after like being on my own for 7, 8 months now is that it was really important for me to communicate what is different about the way I coach, what exactly the coaching offers are,
Mm.
who I tend to work with. Because for people who aren't coaches, right, it's just like a black boxer.
Mm.
A lot of people don't actually know what coaching is, how it works, who it's for.
Mhm.
So right now, the main offers that I have, right, is I call it the 3+4, not a very creative name, but essentially it's how I work with clients one-to-one, where you kind of focus at the beginning with 3 sessions and get that momentum, get that clarity on the goal. And then after that, move towards like, okay, how do we build new habits? How do we design experiments so you can get
Mm.
full feedback?
Right.
A second one is also working with aspiring business owners.
Mhm.
So more and more people, I believe, will be keeping their day job and starting something on the side, whether it's
Mm.
for income, inspiration, or independence. And that is, for a lot of people, a major shift in terms of how they operate, how they think, the skills that they will develop. And it's not something where you can just read a book or go through a course and then do it, right? You have to figure
Mhm.
out who you are as a business owner, what is it you actually want.
Right.
And then the third thing, which is actually kind of like I just call it beta testing. It's not a tech product yet. Um, is what I call the Deliberate Joy program, which is a hybrid one-to-one
Mhm.
and small group coaching. And the idea is to like build a habit of inspiration and
Mm.
hopefully a bit of community as well, because I
Mm.
think that is something I would like in the long term. It will be helpful for the people that I work with. So yeah, I just launched like 2 days ago, I think. But I have 5 people who are interested already.
Wow,
So
great.
just going through the process of like making sure that it's right for them, and then we're gonna cap it at 10 people.
Mm.
Um, yeah, but I think one of the reasons why I set this up is also because I realized like coaching is a big, like people are hesitant to go into coaching
Mm.
because they don't actually know what they are going in for. They don't know how it's structured. They don't know how to decide which coach is good for them.
Mm.
Um, and so this is kind of meant to provide like I think a bit more familiarity in terms of the format. It's a little bit more accessible, so it's priced a lot more affordably than one
Mm.
coaching. And hopefully it just kind of like de-risks it a little bit for people who are interested in coaching. And I think I feel like that is one of the things that I mean, maybe you can share a bit about why you built it, but I feel like that's one of the things that a platform like Coachfellas or other coaching platforms that are out there can actually help with, because it's so opaque to people who are not coaches.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'd be curious about what you see on your platform, or why you started it, because I think accessibility for coaching and like demystifying it is a really big part of people feeling comfortable to reach out and get the support that they need to just grow faster.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for the question. So I personally believe coaching really can benefit a lot of people. I myself also been through coaching, and for me, it was like really uncovering that sense of like I'm not enough narrative. And then once I figured that out, like, oh wow, I realized that it plays out a lot in many different areas of my life, like the work, family, and then like somehow I self-sabotage myself in certain actions. And then once I figured it out, that awareness of it, then I could make conscious choice to make a difference. So I thought really like, why aren't people having access to coaches? Again, coaches have a lot of like myths around it, or like misconceptions around it. Like it's only for C-suites, like the high potential people. It's really expensive. And a lot of people also say like they don't really know where to start looking for a coach. So unless you know somebody to make a referral for you, then the other option is that you just Google or search online, which is
Yeah.
not really the most effective way to find a coach. So really wanted to actually create Coachfellas to facilitate this process of connecting with a coach. So like kind of like just how I always say Airbnb built trust and safety for people to stay in a stranger's home. Coachfellas aims to build trust and safety for people to speak with a stranger, which is the coach. And we build trust and safety by making sure that the coaches that we come online onto the platform is verified, the credentials, we check the credentials. There's real reviews of the coaches, so you know in terms of the performance, how they perform, whether other people have a good experience or poor experience about them. And on top of that, because a lot of people also feel like coaching is very expensive, so we also wanted to make sure there's affordability. And we have a diverse range of coaches to create that affordability. So while some of the coaches would price like premium packages on the platform, but we also see coaches who offer kind of pro bono free services, or even like accept donations for charity organizations. So there really is like a wide variety of like budget points to really fit any kind of like person's budget. So I think creating accessibility for everyone is the key. And sometimes I tell people like, oh, I have this big, hairy, audacious goal. I want to impact 1 billion lives positively through the power of coaching. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was actually just about to ask you how you build that trust and safety, but I think you answered it. It sounds like a mix of providing different coaches who will suit different people, and then also kind of having those reviews upfront so that it's not just like, oh, I put a profile there, but you actually hear from other people who have been coached by them before. Yeah. What do you think is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to finding the right coach?
Finding the right coach. I think there is a you're not sure if you're gonna be a right fit, or like you have the right chemistry with the person. So a lot of coaches, they tell you to go for chemistry call, discovery call.
Yeah.
But for somebody like myself, like maybe a bit more introverted, I'm like, wow, I have to have a call with the person first before I have that chemistry. It feels like it's a big barrier for me.
Okay.
And so one of the things I wanted to do was actually like in this video to talk to different coaches to showcase them. So like you talking, it demystifies Lin. Lynn is not so scary. She's quite friendly. She smiles a lot, you know. And hearing you talk about your coaching methodology and your ethos as well gives them that sense of like, oh, I kind of know this coach already.
Mm.
So through the process, by viewing the video content, once they feel like they're more comfortable, then maybe they can make that next step. Okay, let me book that chemistry call. Let me book that discovery call and find out more and speak to them. Yeah.
Mm.
So one of the things that we've also done is that coaches on our platform can actually upload a video. I know it's a lot more effort for the coaches, but they can upload a video introduction about themselves, kind of like giving the clients a sense of like who they might be speaking with first before they actually make that next step as well. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Okay, that's so interesting.
Mm.
Yeah, I never thought of that as a hurdle. Like I never thought of discovery calls as being, potentially intimidating for some people. So yeah, okay. That makes sense. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
For sharing.
So
Yeah.
Coachfellas kind of like has kind of like we're aiming to have as much variety of coaches as possible.
Mm,
And it's quite heartening to actually see like more and more coaches also enrolling every day. I mean, ideally we hit like 1 million coaches. I'm not sure how many coaches are there, but yeah, we hit enough coaches to provide that variety. So like if you're looking for like, let's say a villa, right? You go Airbnb, you can find a villa. You want
yeah.
to look for an apartment, you can find an apartment. So just like that, we also want to provide very different range of services on
Mm,
Coachfellas. And one of the things that I was even thinking of doing eventually was actually coaching experiences. So like, you know, some coaches, they create retreats,
yeah.
like 1 day
Right.
mindfulness retreat, 2 days kind of like I don't know what you call it, like get a couple of people together, group style coaching, and then they work towards a specific goal. So that
Mm,
could be a unique coaching experience as well, and we want to feature that.
okay.
So beyond just saying, oh, I have a one-on-one call for you with you. So I think that's something that I'm planning as well, and hopefully I can do that in the next couple of months.
Yeah, I think that'd be really interesting because like one
Mm.
of the things that I've been hearing about is that because I was traveling for a while and I was coaching clients for the first half of the year mostly online, and I realized that people really want the in-person element,
Mm.
which surprises me because I'm very happy online. But I think that's also a reflection of wanting that sense of connectedness or
Mhm.
community with people who are quite like-minded or who are very growth-minded as well.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about, oh, could I or should I host like a mini, like a year-end reflection kind of thing,
Mm.
something pretty casual, pretty simple, but also like structured for people I've coached before or people on my mailing list.
Mhm.
Because I have this newsletter, and then if I do that, I think in person would be nice, is the feedback that I've gotten so far as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
So that's quite in line with what you're talking about. And I think it's really interesting that you have a lot of coaches from all over the world actually,
Mm.
who sign up on Coachfellas.
Mm.
So you really do like see the start of that diversity that you're looking to build.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So go to Coachfellas, connect with Lynn or
Oh,
other coaches. There's a lot of transparency. You can filter, find the right kind of coach for you. Read about their profile. Some of them already have reviews online. So yeah, hopefully this will create that sense of trust and safety for you as you look to speak to somebody about achieving what you want to do in your life. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a nice, almost like a one-stop shop for people who are
Mhm.
new to exploring coaching, because you can look at different options at the same time and kind of like get a sense of which ones make sense for you,
Mhm.
rather than have to go to, let's say 5 or 10 different websites, and then you have to get a sense of each coach individually. You kind of get them side by side. So yeah, I think it'll definitely be helpful for people who are thinking about coaching.
Great. Great. Yeah. So thank you so much, Lynn, for coming on to Thrive Talks with Coaches.
Thanks.
All the best with the new rebrand and the Deliberate Joy program as well. Hope it's a great success for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me too. Like, I didn't realize I would be the first one. It's an honor. It's slightly intimidating, but thanks for having me on and for, letting me share a bit more about how I work with clients and my approach. Yeah, I hope it's helpful for people out there, and I just really enjoyed our chat as well.
Great. Thank you.
All right, see you.